So we gotta do a intro where I'm just like, welcome back to Rebels Revisited. I should just use that. Welcome back to Rebels Revisited. I am joined by a special guest, Mal. Say hello to the people.
Hello. How are you guys?
The triumphant return of this duo, this chaos duo.
Absolute chaos.
And we're here to talk about 0 Hour. So let's go. This is 0 Hour Revisited. Such an exciting time.
So excited. I'm so excited for this.
Such an exciting time. Season 3 has been a bit of a chore, to be honest. Season 3 is very draining for me. But here we are at the end of it. And I love this episode so much. I think it's one of the most underrated Star Wars finales.
Oh,
It's
absolutely.
So it's so good.
It's so I know. I just rewatching. I've rewatched it the last 2 days. I was at work watching part 2 today. And I'm just like, why does no one talk about this episode more? Like the music, everything.
It's
Thrawn.
so good.
So good.
So good. I was like, this episode, it changed me as a person for 2 weeks. I was on a high after this. I was every single day I walked through my life just being so much more cheerful, for no reason. Everyone noticed the mood shift. It was really this episode just put me on such a high that it actually changed me as a person for 2 entire weeks into just being randomly happy all the time.
That's funny that it put you on a high, because the end of this episode is such a low for the Ghost crew. Even though they escaped, it's such a low.
It's because nobody died.
Okay, that's a good point.
It's because everybody was there and nobody died.
Yeah.
Except for Sato, rest in peace. But I was positive Callus was he was it. This was it for him. I was positive.
Right.
I was 100% positive that Callus was going to die, and then he didn't.
Right.
Honestly. And I was like, this is it. This is the best day of my life. And everyone was in it. Oh my gosh, there was not a Kanan-sized hole in the episode. The rest
that comes later on.
You can't relate. I was like, yes.
It was actually really interesting watching it this time, because when I watched it for the first time and the second time after that, I wasn't as big as a Thrawn person as I was now. It's such a completely different feeling going in and watching it on the side of the Ghost crew and be like, oh my gosh, no, no Thrawn, no. And it's yes, Ghost crew. And now I'm like, Thrawn, yes, go.
It is so interesting, having the context of the Thrawn books and then watching this. It's different. It's different.
It's a way different. It's such a different experience,
because he's a different person than what you think just from watching Rebels. And so it kind of it becomes more interesting knowing more about what he's actually the canon iteration of him, what he's actually like.
Yeah.
It definitely recontextualizes a lot in Rebels.
Oh yeah. I mean, you see some of the dialogue that he has and you can just pick out the word, especially the way he phrases his sentences, what he actually means.
Right.
When you have read the book.
I think that I said something about that in my notes. I didn't get a chance to look at your notes. But you're ah! You're
yes.
Oh, I know what he's really saying. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And when we get to that, we can kind of go over it.
Yeah.
There's a few parts in my notes where I'm just on the surface it looks like this, but if you actually dive into the specific word choice, it's actually this.
Yes. All right. Let's get into the episode.
Let's do this.
Let's get into the episode. The first scene is rewatching it, I just get so excited. I get excited jitters rewatching
it. The
first time I watched it, it was kind of stressful. It was kind of stressful the first time I watched it. But now that I know that everything is okay at the end of the episode, I get excited now.
Right.
And now that I know more about Thrawn, I get excited now. The first scene is just so.
I know,
that's a good way to open. It's such a good way to open. Because one, we definitely had to swing the story back around to Callus and Thrawn, because it's kind of been a minute, especially since twin sons just happened, and that was huge and also completely irrelevant to this plot.
Right.
But it was huge. So they definitely had to be okay, all that happened. Now we're back with the Rebels
With the
story.
continuation of the Imperial and Rebels story now. Yeah.
And it's like, it's just so good. Like like Thrawn's dialogue is just so good.
Yes, it's so good. I think one of my favorite things about this opening scene with Thrawn, Tarkin, Callus, Price, and Constantine is Thrawn's surety of his plan that the rebels are going to attack the TIE Defender factory. Like, he has no doubt. No matter who the information is coming from, he has no doubt. And even Tarkin and everyone else is like, they wouldn't dare do that. Like, there's no way. No, like, they're not going to do that. And Thrawn's like, yeah, let's think again. Who are we dealing with? We're dealing with the Phoenix Squadron. We've known from the past that they're known to do above and beyond. They're going to try the impossible because they
And
make the
he's
impossible possible.
Yeah, and he's like experienced that before in Secret Cargo,
Yeah.
where they were like Thrawn, sir, we let them get away, we failed, and he was like, nah, he's like, we learned, and now here it is. That lesson directly carries over to here, and learning about,
like,
you know, how
you would
far
think, like, with
go
their...
and how radical they're willing to be.
Exactly. And you would think that they would trust him more, knowing how much he has had success with the rebels, even though they've gotten away every single time beforehand. Why wouldn't they trust him when everything he's proven so far has been right?
We know
that'll come into play later.
We know why they don't trust him. Because they're racist. Anyway, great scene. We're right into the tension, right into the, you know, main story again. The dialogue is so good. Like, everything leading up to this has been rehearsal. I just scream. Like, I get like,
yes.
What happens next?
Oh, I actually think one of the most, and like another thing with this scene is that Thrawn knows that Callus is listening. Like, you listen to his wordplay and what he's saying, how he's saying it. He knows Callus is listening because he knows Callus is Fulcrum. Literally, the next scene with Thrawn is, you know, Callus saying, Thrawn knows, cuts off. Oh, Callus. Or should I call you Fulcrum? Like, he knows. So he's saying this.
He's known for a long time.
Yeah. Like, he clearly, so he knows Callus is watching his every move, and he's saying this strictly because he knows that that Callus is listening, and he's going to report it or attempt to report it back to the Ghost through. So, like, this discrepancy, like, that people notice, like, oh, I won't be accepting surrenders. Like, that he's specifically saying this to put them on edge. We know Thrawn values all life. It says it in Greater Good. He values all life. So, you know, he's saying all this specifically for Callus to get them on edge.
Yeah, like, he knows that he has a wider audience than who's in front of him.
Exactly.
And he is speaking to both of these audiences at the same time. It's like it's almost like there's two different, like, presentations at the same time with the same words, but like two different. So good.
Yeah.
So good. How do you even write this?
I wish I could tell you. So what I have next in my notes is so it's actually the scene with, you know, you noted Ezra being, I think this is actually before, but the symbolism of lighting in the ships when Dodonna shows up. And is this after the little brief with Ezra and he's saying, like,
I don't remember.
I wish I knew, but essentially the symbolism of the lighting in the ships when it goes to Commander Sato and Dodonna, as if you notice, Sato still has, you know, he has Imperial ships as his part of his fleet, but then Dodonna has Rebellion ships. So you look in Sato's fleet and it's still that depressing gray and darkness, where Dodonna is still in the light. Like, he has that, you know, that light that we see in, like, A New Hope with the lighting, and then even just like the white background, you can still see how, even though Sato's part of the rebellion, he has those Imperial ships and the shadow of the Empire is still constantly over them. Where when they have the rebellion ships, it's this is our turf. You can't mess with us. Even though, like, but you look at the Ghost Crew, the Phoenix Squad, they have Imperial ships, so it's still, they have the shadow of the Empire leaning over them.
And I think that definitely, like, also ties into showing how much the rebellion has grown, because like looking at the difference between these things shows how they're becoming like self-sufficient, you know,
Mhm.
because they don't have to like rely on like scraps from the Empire. Like they're not,
Right.
you know, this isn't, I mean, compared to the Empire, it's ragtag, but compared
Right.
to Ghost Crew, you know, this is not like a ragtag, like throwing together an army anymore. Like this is becoming
Right.
legit. And
Like this
now,
is
you know,
real.
right, like, and now they don't, there's like a strength to that sort of brightness of,
Yeah, it's the hope that it
yeah,
represents
that's sort of showing like the strength that this army is
has grown.
gaining, yeah,
Yeah.
compared to like Phoenix Squadron, which is thrown together and
Mhm.
doing its best.
Yeah. I mean, they're just along for the ride, you know.
Like,
Like they'll take what they can get.
and I think that's probably one of the most interesting things about season 3, like the way that we watch the rebellion. We don't even watch it grow. The way that we see that it has grown in season 3, I
Mhm.
think is one of the most interesting things about the season. It's a lot less of seeing the rebellion like gradually grow. I think that was more season 2. In season 3, it's like the Ghost Crew just gets put in situations and you're like, whoa, look around, the rebellion got really big. It's like,
Yeah. Yeah. And
it's,
like, and even Kanan talks about that in the beginning. He's like, I don't want to be a part of this. This isn't what I signed up for. Like, this is too big.
and that
Like,
was in season 2. Even in the beginning of season 2, it was a lot more than what it was at the beginning of season 1. So now
yeah.
we're looking at season 3 and it's like,
And it's just right. It's like 3 tiers above what it was in season 2. Cause I mean, they're part of the rebellion now. Or I mean, they were in season 2, but now they're part of Mon Mothma's rebellion. And
right.
that's the rebellion.
Secret Courier was definitely like a turning point.
Mm-hmm.
That was
Yeah.
kind of the first time when on this show you realize like, whoa, the rebellion has grown a lot without the Ghost Crew and like around the Ghost Crew. There's like,
Yeah.
there's a lot more out there that's really important that's happening and we don't even know because our point of view characters are the Ghost Crew.
Mm-hmm.
And then that's, you know, and then obviously that's like literally a turning point because that's the one where Mon Mothma like sort of pledges allegiance to the
Officially
rebellion.
switches.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's a big one. And
Mm-hmm.
like it's just, it's interesting. It's interesting. What is the next thing on here? Oh, the Kanan and Ezra interaction.
Yes.
Which when I was like not equipped to handle that when I rewatched this, I was like, oh my god, this scene. I was like, right.
This is one of the scenes that lives in my head rent free.
Like no, rent free. Rent free. Oh my god.
Like there are just sometimes random throughout the day, it's just like, you know, this moment, Kanan is like, you didn't teach me just about being a Jedi. You teach me about life, and like even Kanan, like that's both a Kanan and Ezra moment. Like there is like, I don't know if I have any more left to teach you. He's like, Ezra's like, what are you talking about? You taught me not just about being a Jedi, but about life. Like that's such a dad moment. Even Kanan's like it's just so heartfelt.
How do I even talk about this? We'll start from the top of the whole thing. First, we've got, you know, everyone's like reflecting on things a little. I don't remember exactly how it goes. We're talking about the rebellion and stuff,
Yeah.
and about, you know, I don't remember exactly what the context was, but like I remember the vibes, right?
Right.
I think they were talking about, I don't know, like, oh, look at what, you know, you've done, all of my Ghost Crew friends, look at what we've done for the rebellion. And Ezra was like, I didn't do anything. If it weren't for you, I'd be back on Lothal waiting to be rescued like everybody else.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I'm like, first of all, like that's just the first thing we want to hit on here.
That's just the worst.
That he said that.
Yeah. Right.
This actually
Like
ties back to something I was
self-esteem.
talking about in the last video for Twin Sons. And when I was talking about Twin Sons, I was talking about this thing where Ezra does, I don't think he's exactly insecure, but I do think that he doesn't exactly realize his own value to the rebellion.
Right.
And
Mm-hmm.
a major point in Twin Sons is that he thought he needed to be following the God. I mean, this has been a major thing throughout season 3, I think. This has been a big part of his arc in season 3, that he thinks that he has to like follow or rely on something of greater importance than him, of greater knowledge than him. I think he's maybe a little bit too caught up on his own like inexperience or his own roots.
Yeah.
And in the last episode, Obi-Wan tells him, you know, that he's incorrect about that, and that
Yeah.
he needs to stop being stupid.
Like that he has everything he needs.
Right. He's like Obi-Wan tells him, you have everything you need, but you seem to be setting it all aside, you know, unsaid in favor of, you know, like these holocrons or these whatever. So I think that's like kind of carried over from the last episode. But I like how that like sort of leads into this conversation between him and Kanan, where they're like, now we're in reflection mode and we're like reflecting on like everything in like the last 3 seasons between them, and it's so hard to talk about. I love how like honest this conversation is. I love how honest it is. I love how open it is. Like I love everything that Kanan's saying to Ezra. He's being so honest, and he's like admitting his fear that he had of being a teacher, and he admits to like insecurity about it that he still has because old habits die hard, I guess. That's one of the great things about Kanan, because he works around all of his patterns. He never really gets over them. But I think that's great. I think that's probably one of the reasons why he's my favorite. Listen, he's messed up.
Just straight
No, look, Kanan is messed up. Kanan is messed up. And I love the way that they wrote him, because it's not that easy.
It's not.
It's just not. It's just not. And you can like grow a lot and heal a lot as a person, but that doesn't mean that things just go away.
No, yeah. But I think
he was like season 1, he was a whole wreck of insecurity. He was a whole wreck of insecurity. It like affected his relationships. Level of a wreck of insecurity. And he's not like that anymore, but there's still like something left over that compels him to say, I don't know if I have anything to teach you anymore.
Yeah.
And I'm like, Kanan. But no, but I'm saying I love this because it's not that easy.
Right.
Not as easy as like, oh, the first episode of season 3 solves all of his problems. No, it didn't. He just understood them better, and now he's able to overcome them better, but that doesn't mean they go away. So he's still out here like, I don't know if I have anything to teach you anymore. He's like, oh, I'm going to die next season. That's what that line is actually saying. When I watched that back in 2017 and he said that line, it struck fear into my heart.
This conversation really is a good goodbye. Like, I don't know if I have anything left to teach you. Like, this is such a really good moment to end off Kanan's character. So yeah.
I didn't think he was gonna die like in that episode, but I was like, oh, end of the series.
It's gonna happen. Yeah.
I was like, that seals it right there. We're starting to have conversations about his purpose, like ending or changing, or I'm like, you know, if Ezra's the main character, what's Kanan's purpose? Because, you know, every other character kind of has a purpose to serve the main character. So Ezra's the main character. So that makes what's Kanan's purpose? It's the mentor to Ezra. It's teaching Ezra. Right. Now we're having this conversation about that kind of ending / changing, and I'm like, don't like that. Even though Ezra like negates it. You know, Ezra's like, no, you teach me about life. I'm like, oh, miss me with that. Don't even try it. I know what you're saying. You're saying that he's gonna die next season. Although I do love that response from Ezra.
Yeah.
Love that response from Ezra. This scene is a lot to process.
It is. You know? Yeah. But anyway, it's definitely a really deep scene.
There's just so much going on. There's a lot.
Yeah.
A lot. Because then we have, you know, because we have all that with Kanan, but then we have Ezra, who's like, you don't just teach me about how to be a Jedi, how to use the Force, whatever. He's like, you teach me about life. He's like, you're my dad, boogie woogie woogie. He's like, you're not just my master. You are my dad. He's like, whatever about all that Jedi stuff. You teach me about how to be a good person, Kanan. You teach me about life. I'm like, oh my God, he's your dad. Anyway, back to Ezra's response. I just think it says a lot about him as a person. The fact that he values like being taught how to be a better person, maybe even more than learning these like special powers, like, oh, I can use a laser sword, oh, I can use the like that does not matter as much as learning about how to be a better person. And that's what he values Kanan for. He values Kanan for helping him to grow as a person. And I think that says a lot about Ezra. That's what
I think it says a lot about both their character development.
I think it says a lot about both of them. I think it says a lot about Kanan that that's what he helped Ezra to do. I love that Ezra even says this at all, because Kanan is perpetually hung up on like, but I did not have that much training, but am I qualified for this? As if that's the only thing that matters about how much Jedi knowledge he has, which is just, it's so untrue. And Ezra's like, you teach me about life. And I'm like, exactly.
Yeah.
I probably talked about that for like 15 minutes, so maybe we should move on.
Probably.
Letting me talk like about like Kanan and Ezra is like letting your like feral dog off of the leash. Like, why would you do that?
And this next part is literally me going feral about Thrawn.
Yes. I love this.
So
this is a great scene.
So this scene is essentially when Thrawn walks in on Kallus sending the Fulcrum transmission, and they have that whole fight, and Thrawn's just like, well, let's go then. Like, Thrawn, because Kallus throws the first punch, he's like, yeah, you know, let's just fight. I'm not even going to try to talk to you because I know how this is going to go. So essentially, this entire dialogue doesn't seem like important, but it's so crucial, because Thrawn, when he's saying, like, after that first, like, a few initial punches and Kallus is on the ground, he's like, you know, your technique is good, but it's limited by the Imperial Academy. In your notes, you said he's insulting Kallus. Where on the front, yeah, he's definitely insulting Kallus.
I kind of meant more like he was insulting the Empire.
Yeah. So we all know, like, Thrawn takes it into his own head to train when he does. Like, we saw that in an earlier episode. Oh my gosh, I love that scene. Even Thrawn knew how to do this before joining the Empire. I mean, he survived months in exile and then proved himself to be above and beyond in the Imperial Academy. And then take a look at also who fought first. Kallus did. Thrawn didn't throw the first punch. He's standing there all calm and collected, and then he's essentially defending himself against Kallus. He's not, everything that he's doing is in defense. Knowing what we do from Thrawn, from the Imperial trilogy of Thrawn, we know that he does everything for the greater good of the Ascendancy. And we know that Thrawn isn't alone in the city. He has the two Death Troopers right outside the room. So everything he's saying is also a play on words, making everyone think that he's completely loyal to the Empire when that's not it. He's entirely loyal to the Chiss Ascendancy. And he's complimenting Kallus right here. Is, you know, you have good form, but unfortunately, because of the Empire,
that's what I got out of that line.
Yeah, you have so much potential, but because of your training at the Imperial Academy, you're just not good enough.
That's what I got out of that
good
line.
Enough to beat me. And if it wasn't at the expense of revealing his loyalties, and at the expense of, I don't think Kallus trusted him enough for this. If Thrawn had the opportunity, I think he would have sent Kallus back to the Ascendancy, like he did with Eli, and like he offered to Night Swan in the books, because he knows Thrawn knows Kallus is watching his every move. And I think if Kallus was able to see Thrawn like Eli did, and I think Thrawn could have sent Kallus to the Ascendancy, because Kallus would be such an asset to the Ascendancy, knowing what he does with the Empire.
I was just about to bring up the same thing. I was like, do you think he was like disappointed when he found out that when he figured out Kallus's fulcrum, because he was like, you know, could have used him, man.
I think the disappointment sets in when he realizes Kallus is never going to listen to him. Like that moment saying, you talk too much. clearly he, like, you can see him just kind of give up there. He's like, okay, clearly you're in for something then. Let's get it over with. I think if he was at the tower alone, if he's at the com tower alone and he had the chance to talk to Callus, I think there would have been a completely different situation and route that this episode would have taken. Because
That's
notice he
like,
doesn't.
That's such a cool take on like their dynamic that you wouldn't even think about.
And it's really sad because this entire side of Thrawn is strictly in the books, and I think, I mean, it's crucial for Rebels Thrawn to be the antagonist that they portray him as. Absolutely. Because that's what he needs to be. He needs to have that Empire first front to fool everyone that the Empire is his number one priority when it's not. Yeah.
And even then, for this story, this, this is Rebels. This is not, Thrawn the show. This is Star Wars.
Right. It's not about Thrawn.
Rebels needed a really solid antagonist that would be able to outsmart the heroes.
Everyone.
Yeah, that would be able to outsmart the Rebels, because so far, they've had a winning streak. They've gone up against some tough adversaries.
Right, like they've been up against Vader twice and escaped.
Right, but like the major villains, like the overarching villains, they've been able to beat them. They never really met their match, and they needed someone who was believably their match, because if they've been able to outsmart all of these Imperials, you can't just bring in like any old antagonist. It's got to be someone, because clearly they've proven themselves to be some pretty smart rebels.
So right, they need someone who sees a bigger picture.
So they needed someone. So this show like needed someone like Thrawn as an antagonist. Mm-hmm. And in this context, he's here to serve the show. He's here to serve, like what this story needs, to fill a role that this story needed filled. And that's fine. And I think, even if he doesn't have as much like depth as he does in the books, I think that's okay for this context. And I also think it makes the books worth reading.
Absolutely.
Because otherwise, I don't know, like, what would the, outside of it being like, ooh, a fan favorite character in canon books, what would be the draw of those books if it didn't change the way that we looked at Thrawn,
Exactly. And I think that's where like phrasing of calling him what he is, an antagonist, really comes into play, because I mean, if you look at Thrawn in all of his novels, you can even look at it in like the Legend trilogy. If you've read those books, Thrawn is an antagonist. He's not a villain. You would never know that if you didn't read the books. That's what makes the Thrawn books such great Star Wars novels, and a fan favorite of every person who's ever read these novels. They're always at least in the top 10 of their favorite, because it's such a different perspective on him that you can't deny is just written beautifully, and such an just outstanding perspective on his character. So my next notes are on the rediscovery of Atollon. This is honestly one of my favorite Thrawn scenes ever. Like, this constantly is just in the back of my mind. He's so intimidating right here. Just like in the panic in Callus's face is everything too. Like, he's saying, okay, this is the trajectory of General Donosky, and this is your transmission of the Volker message. Callus's like, okay, so what? There's nothing special about it. There's no planet or system there. He's like, yeah, we'll take them separately. They don't mean anything. Put them together. Look at where they can join. He's like, and he's like, it's funny. There's no planet here under Imperial charge, but you take the, a map of the people in that area, and here's the system, the Atollon. Like, it's Atollon. And I love how he just uses art for everything, because it's the art and depiction of that area that he uses. And we're all well aware of Thrawn's quote, "To defeat an enemy, you must know them, not simply their battle tactics, but their history, philosophy, art." Literally is everything, just works so well, because he knows the Phoenix Squadron, and he studies not only the Ghost Crew, but the history of the places they originate from, where their bases are, the history of their bases, and their history with the Empire. He literally knows everything. And in the scene after this, it's, Thrawn comes onto the screen, and Hera's like, Thrawn knows. And Ezra's like, he knows. Everyone is just like, he knows, because he does. He knows the history of Dodonna, even though we literally just introduced him. He knows the history of Adelon because he studied it. He knows Sabine's history with Mandalore. He knows Ezra's history on Lothal, Kanan's history with the Jedi Order. He literally knows everything because of this one line, because he studies literally everything about them. And that's why I love this scene so much, because it literally just comes together and you're like, oh my gosh, he knows everything.
I love it when Thrawn is kind of terrifying.
Yes. It's so amazing when he's terrifying.
Like, we're not going to pretend he isn't.
No, because he totally is.
Like, you know, he may not be like a cut and dry villain, but we're not going to pretend he's not a little bit terrifying.
Oh no, and you can totally see the terror on Callus's face. Like, you see just his entire hope just sink right back into him, because he goes, yeah, I mean, you'll never know. He's cocky. And then he just, Thrawn lays everything out on the table, and he's just like, kidding me? Everything I've ever done was just useless because this guy knows everything.
So
oh my gosh, and in that conversation with Hera, like their first like official interaction,
it's so good.
like,
oh my god,
like his emphasis on General Syndulla. Like, he acknowledges everyone at the table and then he goes, General Syndulla. Like,
their rivalry is so underrated. It's so underrated. It's so good. The amount of tension between them when they have only communicated through like battle,
right?
Isn't that so cool? It's like they built a rivalry based like purely on like battle alone. They've like never talked to each other really.
No.
Like, this is the first time they're face to face, but it's personal. They're not even face to face.
I know, like, it's already personal. I know.
He's a hologram, but it's personal, and they've like never talked to each other, but they know each other because both of them are smart like that, you know.
Yes, I honestly think that,
you know, obviously she's born for this. She's born to be a general. She's good at this, and she knows what she's doing, and she understands strategy. And you know, maybe she's not, you know, quite on the level of Thrawn because no,
but they're really good rivals because they are both so smart.
He respects her as a military leader, so they can kind of build a relationship through battle alone because they can figure each other out that way.
Yeah,
like that, and so then they meet, you know, meet face to face. You know, they're in this like hologram whatever communication, and it's like that. It's like they've been, you know, personal arch enemies. Like, that tension is immediately there. It's so good.
I think they are really greatly matched. They're so, this is such a good match.
And then right, okay, we have a good Thrawn line.
Yep, I do not require glory, only results for my empire. So that's actually, I had one note before that.
Oh, okay, what was it?
So it's actually the interdictor cruiser. The entire fleet's there, and Dodonna's like, okay, I'm getting out of here, like, we need to leave. And then just they're pulled out of hyperspace, and then the interdictor comes in. It's
the pull out of hyperspace. The pull out of hyperspace sequence is so cool, by the way.
It's so cool. And then just
visually, it's so cool. I know that's not the first time this has happened on the show, but it's just cool.
Always the ships being pulled out of hyperspace is so just
like visually, it's just awesome.
Yes, it's amazing. And then just when it comes onto the screen, it's this horizontal shot of all the ships, and then you just have this massive interdictor cruiser coming onto the screen.
I love it when Rebels is cinema.
Yes. It literally is cinema. And you can see it, like, it compares it to the size. It's right next to the Star Destroyer, and the interdictor cruiser is massive. It's huge. Like, it almost looks like it would be a super Star Destroyer next to the Imperial, like the ISDs, because they're huge and it's menacing and it's mean and it's just and then the Chimera shows up, and it's in and of itself just has power. Like, just the way that they shoot it, like from that just below it, and it's on top, like it's above every other ship, you know, it has power, and it's so much more menacing because, I mean, you have the Chimera at the bottom that automatically like puts that stands that ship out from the rest, and you know who's in the bridge, and you know who's commanding it, and you can just feel the power radiating off of the Chimera because of it, because of the reputation of that ship, and just only because of the Chimera at the bottom. It's just so good.
Moving on. we have a good we've got a good line.
Ugh,
We've got
such
a
a good
great
line. Okay.
line. We've
I
got a
need
great
to
line.
just say like the whole line.
And it seems, when you don't know the context of Thrawn, like in canon, then it's just like a cool line, you know? You're like, oh, that's cool.
Right.
But when you know the
but just like
context, it's like,
right? Okay, so the quote is, "You misunderstand, Captain. I'm not accepting surrenders at this time. I want you to know failure, utter defeat, crashing down upon you, and for you to know that it is I that delivers it to you." I need a minute. I need a minute after that quote. That's just so good. You can't tell me that is just like, I would hear that and I would lose all hope.
another line,
another
like,
line.
right after this line. That's
Yes.
that's
So he
great.
he shuts off the comm to Hera and the rebels, and Constantine's like, well, okay, well hold on, what's just happening? Like and Thrawn is like, I do not require glory, only results for my emperor.
But he like
No.
there's like a little bit of hesitation before for
Right,
my
there's a pause.
emperor.
Right, there is
As if it were an
there's a
afterthought.
pause. Exactly. Like, oh
Because
my
the
gosh.
emperor is an afterthought.
Exactly. Like,
But he
he's
has to,
always in the
like-
back of Thrawn's head, but he's never a first priority for Thrawn.
Yeah, but he has to, you know, but he has to keep up
He
those
has an appearance.
he has
an
to
appearance
keep
to
up those
maintain.
appearances of doing everything for the emperor because that's what he's supposed to do as an imperial. So he's like, I do not
Exactly.
require glory, only results. And then he's like, oh shoot, I have to say something about the emperor for my emperor.
Exactly.
He's like, oh, close one.
Yeah, that's 100% for appearances.
Which, like you
just
don't
like you
even
said.
think about that when you haven't read the books.
Mm-hmm.
But then you've read the books and you're like, oh, he doesn't mean that.
Yeah, no.
Like, he doesn't mean that. He does not care about the emperor. That's
Like-
why it's so much fun. That's why it's so much fun to watch this after reading the books.
I know, and then like I shouldn't have happy squeals from these quotes. Like,
Well,
I should like he's showing them no mercy in this quote, and it's just delivered so well. And it's like,
just
as much as I love the
nice.
Ghost Crew, I love a perfectly written, morally gray character more.
I can
Right? You go into
agree
part
with
2 and it's completely different. Like the way he presents himself in part 1 and then how he actually executes everything in part 2 is just so different and speaks true to Thrawn's character in the books.
But
So like Thrawn in like part 1 is Rebels Thrawn, and then Thrawn in part 2 is Book Thrawn.
But we do have a little bit left of part 1 before we get there. Now we're getting into Kanan and the Bendu.
Mm-hmm.
Which overall, just that whole sort of arc in season 3 is one of my favorite things in the entire show.
The Bendu is one of my favorite characters.
I love the Kanan and the Bendu storyline. It's
I do
like,
too.
I can't even, it's so good that I'm like, how do we even have this? And like, this content is so good. Like, how does it even
So
exist?
good.
How, like, this is a simulation. I'm living in a simulation because this exists and it's this good.
It's so good.
Just the way that this storyline has served Kanan's character arc.
It's just, the Bendu teaches such great lessons.
It's so good.
To Kanan. It's so good.
And even just the things that Kanan like realizes, and
yeah, it's one of the, I know you liked this. I don't know if you made a note on it, but this dialogue between Hera, Kanan, and Ezra right here is also really telling.
Yeah.
Because Kanan doesn't say he's not going. Like when Kanan's like, you two need to go you need to go get help. He doesn't say I'm not going. He says, I'm not leaving you. I'm not leaving you. He doesn't say I'm not going. He won't leave her. He knows what this battle has in store for the Phoenix Squadron, and it's more than death. Like, he knows that with Thrawn at the helm, like driving the reins, this battle is death for all of them, and there's no way in hell he's gonna leave her. And even after he's like, okay, like I'll go get help, he still finds a way to stay on Atollon. And sending Ezra alone, he still finds a way to be with her.
Them.
Yes.
And then Kanan goes to get help.
Yes. And he pisses off the Bendu.
This scene, pivotal. This scene is so
Amazing.
important in Kanan's arc. This is one of the most important scenes. This scene and what it says about not only Kanan's growth, but about like Star Wars itself. So this scene sees Kanan trying to convince the Bendu to help them, to help the rebels, defeat the Empire or whatever. And the Bendu is like, I am the one in the middle. Absolutely not. And Kanan says some really interesting things. Well, first off, he does tick the Bendu off here by calling him a coward for doing that. So there's that. But then he goes into this, speech about thinking that he could be that way, that, back in season 2, he thinks that he can, not be a part of the rebellion. He doesn't want to be a part of the rebellion. He's saying, like, I thought that I could be that way too. I thought that I could be in the middle. I thought that I could stay out of this. And he's like, but when you see people, being oppressed, when you see people getting hurt, he's like, I can't stand by and watch that. So I'm not going to do that anymore. And this is the point where he concretely is now siding with the rebellion, which is like one of the biggest points in his arc, because the idea of doing that was so triggering in season 2. It was so triggering in season 2, the idea of being a part of the military and the idea of like committing to this. And like that speaks like volumes about how much she's grown and healed. That was so terrible for him to even think about in season 2. Like, so the fact that he can do this now, the fact that he can like commit to the rebellion now, just says so much about how much he's been able to heal. That's this side of the Bendu scene. There is the other side of the Bendu scene after Mr. Sato. But as for this scene, I think there's one more thing that's interesting about it, and I think it's kind of what it says about Star Wars in general, and about how the Bendu almost like can't exist like that. It's like against the rules of Star Wars. I think the rules of Star Wars are that you have to believe in something.
I think you honestly should read your note word for word, like what you have before your big Sato sad face
Oh yes,
note.
okay.
I think you need to read that word for word.
All right, here we go. This is word for word my raw notes, what I wrote down as I was like in a delirium trying to take notes on this episode. So this is what I said. I said, it's interesting how the episode sort of says that true neutrality is unsustainable. You have to believe in something. And Star Wars is definitely about that, about finding what you believe in and holding fast to it. And there was the Clone Wars fortune cookie somewhere in there that was like, I don't remember exactly what it said. Do you remember exactly what it said? It was like, there is a war, eventually one must choose sides.
Season 1, episode 14, Defenders of Peace. Once surrounded by war, one must eventually choose a side.
That's the one. That's what it made me think of. I don't actually want to say that Star Wars is necessarily about having to like pick between a binary of sides like that. I don't want to say that Star Wars is saying like you have to join a war and you have to pick a side in the war. I don't.
Right, because you have like the characters. Like if you go back to the Bad Batch and like the Clone Wars, that one character, like the one clone who defects and just starts his own family, he didn't want to choose a side.
Right. And he still chose something.
Right.
He chose his family. So I think that Star Wars is about having to believe in something and knowing what you want to believe in and holding fast to that. I think that that's what I'm really getting out of this scene. And I think like the Bendu is here saying like, I am not going to affect anything at all. I am going to be, a complete bystander. I'm not involved in events. And I can't affect anything. I just exist here and I watch everything happen and I don't really believe in anything because I'm in the middle.
Yeah.
And this kind of shows like, that doesn't really work. And it doesn't really work, which is the next thing to talk about after
after we
Pour
go
one
through.
out. Pour one out for my man's Jun Sato.
Exactly. Poor
A
Sato.
legend. He is missed. He is underrated. Underrated king.
Yeah. One of my favorite parts about the scene is the music.
Rebels is what the sequel trilogy thinks it is. Rebels did it first.
Rebels just did it better.
Rebels did it first. I don't know if I don't really have much of an opinion on if they did it better, because I'm quite honestly, I think I'm too afraid to have actual opinions on The Last Jedi. I think I fear having opinions either way, so I think I don't really have any. So I don't really have any input on if it's better, but Rebels
it's okay. I have my input that actually ties back to The Last Jedi once we go back to the Bendu.
Is Rebels what the sequel trilogy thinks it is? Yes.
Yes.
But that's also a joke that I have with myself. Every time Rebels does anything that reminds me of anything in the sequel trilogy, I just say that Rebels is what the sequel trilogy thinks it is. It really does not mean as much as it sounds like it means coming out of my mouth. I just think it's funny to say that. But maybe Rebels kind of is what the sequel trilogy thinks it is.
I think Rebels builds a lot of themes that the sequel trilogy used.
I agree.
I think that's.
But Rebels just kind of did it better. I will say that. But I will also say that Rebels did things better than a lot of things. So that also.
Yes. Right. You're asking the wrong people that Rebels did it better. Yeah, because I mean, you have two people here who I'm pretty sure favorite TV series is Rebels. Pretty sure your favorite is Rebels. You're talking to the wrong people if you're trying to find out who did it best, because we're going to say Rebels.
Just in general, I think Rebels did it best.
Yeah.
But anyway.
Anyways, Constantine is an ignorant fool, and I'm glad he's dead, especially after disrespecting Thrawn the way he did.
Oh yeah, not rip to Constantine.
He deserved to die.
In not peace.
Rest in peace, Sato. Bye bye, Constantine.
So now we're back to Kanan and the Bendu.
Kanan and the Bendu, and this is where all my notes on the Bendu are. So one of the things here is that I tied back with The Last Jedi is a quote that Bendu says is, "Perhaps it is the will of the Force that the Jedi and all of your kind perish." Because at this point, Bendu's ticked. He's like,
he's mad.
Kanan Jarrus,
this is personal now.
You pissed me off. Yes,
this is personal now.
You pissed me off. And that really reminded me of Luke's quote in The Last Jedi, "The Jedi must end." And that's such a huge theme in the sequels. And that's not a coincidence here. They are like, there is a clear imbalance of light with the Jedi, and there is an imbalance of dark in the Sith. And I think that's something that a lot of Star Wars fans overlook. And that's a really important lesson in The Last Jedi is, I mean, there can be an imbalance of light and there can be an imbalance of dark. And you need to have both to have balance. And I think that's something that the Bendu represents, is he's not light and he's not dark, because he's both. He is the one in the middle. And even when he joins the fight, he is not fighting the Empire. He's fighting everyone. Because Kanan ticked him off. And if the Imperials hadn't been down there,
I think I pointed that out too. I was like, the Bendu's like storm does not discriminate between like our good guys and our bad guys.
Like he is there protecting his
everybody. It's hitting the rebels. It's hitting the Imperials. He doesn't discriminate. He's in the middle.
We can go more into that when we get to
part 2. Situation.
Like we can go more into that when we get to part 2, because this entire thing with the Bendu and his storm is, and how he still doesn't pick a side, is in part 2. So, but I think like that's such a huge theme that they have in The Last Jedi is, we don't need the Jedi. Even though the rebellion is doing good work, they brought an imbalance to Atollon, and it upset the Bendu. That's why every time he talks to Kanan, he's like, "You guys are loud. Do you guys know how loud you guys are?" And he's like, Kanan Jarrus Jedi Knight, you have brought war to my world. He's pissed. He is not happy with Kanan every single time he comes, because he's brought that imbalance there. Even though it's the light side, it's still an imbalance. The Jedi have good intentions. So there's definitely not as bad of an imbalance in the light, but you still need to have a balance, because with one, you need the other.
Because I think the problem that happens with the light, or with like the Jedi, as far as like the light causing imbalance, is when there's a misunderstanding of it. I think that sometimes, I think that something that really caused imbalance on the light side with the Jedi was like how strictly they adhered to rules of following the light. You know, they're like, in order to follow the light, no emotions.
Yeah.
And I
And I
think
think
that breeds a little bit of imbalance.
yeah, no, definitely. And you can see how it affects people like Stellan Gios and Elzar Mann. You
You know
can see
what? We're
how
not going
that
to talk about that. We're not going to talk
I
about
mean, I'm just saying you can see how it affects them because
But
they're clearly they're not okay.
Exactly. You can see how it affects
Balance.
people like Anakin. You can see how it affects Obi-Wan.
Exactly. You can see how it affects everyone.
Emotionally stunted. Obi-Wan has the emotional intelligence of like a grain of rice. I don't know.
Like, and then Anakin just straight up doesn't know how to deal with emotions.
I think that's an imbalance of the light, of trying to cling too closely to the light. Because I think that sort of like, I don't think the Jedi are supposed to fear emotions, but I think they do anyway. I think that's a thing that develops in Jedi culture. Sort of taking that like serenity thing to an extreme and being like, you can't have any emotions actually, even if that's not what like the, you know, the pillars of Jediism actually say. That's kind of what it turns into in like a culture sense, and that's definitely what it kind of becomes a rule of thumb by the prequels.
Yeah.
And that's being too afraid of like a natural darkness. That's being like, if you have a single emotion, it's going to turn you to the dark side. And like, no, you actually like need to have the single emotion because that's how you keep balance within yourself. But you're trying so hard to cling to this idea of the light that you're throwing things off balance. But anyway,
I think one of the reasons why I was so happy in The Rising Storm is they brought in the Jedi saying there is no emotion, there is peace. How they made that like canon with the High Republic. It just builds on what you're saying. Like that's not right. Like that's not natural. And that's where the imbalance with the light comes in, is they don't allow those natural emotions.
And that is something that was really interesting to me about The Rising Storm. And I guess I don't think this is going to be, I'm going to say this is not spoilers. This is not spoilers. I think it's interesting.
Yeah, I wouldn't say so.
We have like Jedi who are saying things like, no, like attachment, emotions, grief, these things are natural. These, you know, these things make us who we are. We're not droids. But, you know, we can't let these things have power over us. You need to get over these feelings and you need to let them go because we don't want them to have power over us. Which, okay, that's all well and good. That's what we say out loud. But then I think it's interesting to also see in the High Republic, like, that's what the Jedi technically think about emotions and stuff, but then you actually see how in practice it like unspokenly is warped, because then you see characters who feel like guilty for feeling grief and who feel like it's like taboo to feel these like strong negative emotions, which is not what was said out loud about emotions. But clearly that is what has become of the culture. That's like, it's not the rules in the High Republic, but it is the culture. And so it's still creating imbalance in that way. Now, I don't think I spoiled anything. Do you think I didn't spoil anything? Those are just concepts. Those are vague concepts. Those are wide concepts. Well, that was an intellectual tangent. So it's a good thing we went on it.
Yeah.
It was an intellectual tangent. But anyway, it actually does relate directly to what I'm going to say about like about what we're saying with the Bendu and Kanan. So now what I was thinking about the Bendu at this point is also tying back to what I was saying about like the unsustainability of neutrality in Star Wars. And also ties to what we're talking about with balance. So it's an interesting little interaction here between the Bendu and Kanan, where the Bendu argues that death is natural because Kanan is like, look at all these people dying. For what? What, like, they're innocent. Like, what is this happening for? This isn't right. And the Bendu's like, well, death is natural. Death is a natural part of life.
I'll sit here and I'll let it happen.
Right. But
Like,
Kanan is like, this is not natural. It's like maybe
right.
death is natural, but not like this.
Yeah, and now we have
So now this is where I think, I mean, they didn't say this in the episode, but I think this is where the topic of balance comes in. I think about this concept in the same way that I think about like the Sith and how they play into balance, as in the Sith create imbalance. There's an argument where it's like, well, the Sith are the dark side, so they are required for balance. And I'm like, the Sith create to the imbalance, I think, actually.
yeah.
I could be wrong about that. I don't know how the Force works.
I
But
think
based off of like looking at Star Wars and how it goes and how I mean, look, the Chosen One prophecy says destroy the Sith and restore balance. That doesn't sound like the Sith are a part of the balance. But anyway,
yeah.
but I don't know how the Force works. But anyway, in that same vein, it's like, so death is a part of balance, but not this death. This death is not a part of balance. I feel like it's kind of the same conversation. Death itself is not in balance because death is a part of life. Jedi don't, we're talking about balance here. We're talking about, I feel like we talk about balance, talk about the Force. So it's like the Jedi or Force users don't like fear death because that's a natural part of life.
Yeah.
But they should want to stop this kind of death that's happening at the hands of the Empire here because that's not natural. And so if it's if it's, the goal here to create balance, then
you need to eliminate the imbalance.
Stop this death from happening. And so I think that when the Bendu now, I guess if we're kind of going into part 2, now the Bendu starts stopping.
Then he has his mental breakdown.
All right, he has that super cool meltdown, which that just looks really cool.
Yeah.
It's a solid. And then in part 2, we see him using the storm to like drive the Empire away.
Yeah. There's definitely more I want to go in depth, but that's literally at the very end of part 2.
Yes.
Yeah. And I think the last thing with part 1 though is Ezra leaving.
Yes.
And
so I'll get back to that. I'll get back to the thoughts once we get to the
we'll get back to the Bendu when he comes
back. We'll get back to the Bendu later. We'll continue this train of thought later, but first.
Yeah. So my thing is I've never liked Mon Mothma. I've never been a fan of her character. And I think, I mean, this is the note I have, like, Thrawn's brilliant, and if it wasn't for Constantine, he would have won this battle. And Mon Mothma knows that. Like, Mon Mothma knows that their odds of winning are little to none, but the only thing she can offer him is may the Force be with you. Like, that's all you can offer people who are part of your rebellion. Like, I never liked that. I think she just kind of abandoned the Phoenix Squadron right here. Like, even though, like, we know you have little crew, but there's something you can do. Like, you have at least 1 or 2 people you can send to help, because help is help, And clearly you can see, just like when Ezra grabbed Sabine, a group of 10 made a difference.
And that's part 1. Now go watch part 2. Thanks for watching, and may the Force be with you always.